I hope you don't mind I join you?
I don't mind.
I think about you, Kosi, every day. Not just when I see you, wake up, when I'm supposed to be reading and I'm not reading.
You know what people are saying. Song-hee, you know what it would mean. For you. For your family.
Stay away from Song-hee. I will not warn you again.
Marry me, Kosi. I want you by my side for the rest of our lives.
One moment, the sky above Seoul was a bruised shade of violet, and the next, it cracked open like something that had been holding its breath for too long. Kosi pressed herself under the narrow overhang of the school's east corridor, her textbooks clutched to her chest, watching the water hammer the courtyard stones with a kind of fury she understood deeply. She had been trying to leave early. She always tried to leave early. It was easier that way, before the hallways filled, before the whispers started, before someone's phone camera found her from across the cafeteria and she had to pretend she hadn't noticed, pretend the laughter that followed wasn't about her, pretend she was somewhere else entirely, somewhere warm and familiar, somewhere that smelled like her mother's kitchen and sounded like Lagos at dusk. She pulled her cardigan tighter and watched the rain. "You're going to stand there until it stops?" She turned. Kang Song-hee was leaning against the corridor wall 3 feet away from her, her blazer folded over one arm, his dark eyes fixed on the falling water. He hadn't looked at her when he spoke. He was doing that thing he sometimes did, where he made a conversation feel accidental, like bumping into someone on a quiet street. Kosi had learned over the past few weeks that nothing Song-hee did was accidental. "I don't mind waiting," she said. "It won't stop for another hour, at least." He finally looked at her, and there was something in his expression she couldn't quite name. Not the polished calm he wore in front of everyone else. Something quieter, unguarded. "I checked the forecast." She almost smiled. "You checked the forecast?" "I check it every morning." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. The rain filled the silence between them, loud and relentless. "Because I like to know what's coming." Kosi looked at him for a long moment. Kang Song-hee, the boy every girl in Hanguk International Academy had memorized, the boy whose entrance into a room rearranged it, the son of Chairman Kang Jun-tae, whose name appeared on 3 buildings she had passed on the way from the airport the day she arrived in Seoul, exhausted and terrified, and trying very hard to show neither. Song-hee, who sat in the front row of advanced sciences and never raised his hand because he never needed to, who walked through crowds the way water moved around stone, effortlessly, inevitably. That Song-hee had looked at her across the cafeteria on her 4th day and sat down across from her table without asking. That had been the moment everything changed, though she hadn't known it yet. "Song-hee," she said carefully, "why are you still here? School ended 40 minutes ago." He turned to face her fully then, and the unguarded thing in his expression deepened into something that made her heart do something inconvenient. "I was waiting," he said. "For what?" "For a reason to say something I've been trying to say for 3 weeks." The rain came down harder. Somewhere across the courtyard, a drain overflowed, and a small river began threading its way between the stones. Kosi stood very still. She had learned to be still when she sensed something approaching she wasn't sure she was ready for. "You don't have to say anything," she said quietly. "I know." He took one step toward her, not close enough to crowd her, just close enough to be real. "That's actually what took me 3 weeks. knowing I didn't have to, but wanting to anyway. She looked away. Across the courtyard, through the curtain of rain, she could see the greenhouse, its glass panels fogged from within, the pale green shapes of the plants pressing against the glass like they were trying to see out. That greenhouse. She had spent more hours there with him than she had anywhere else in Seoul, sitting on the wooden bench near the orchids while he talked about his mother who had died when he was 12, and she talked about her grandmother in Enugu, who called her every Sunday and always said the same thing. Kosi, be a light wherever you go, even when they try to put you out. She had not told Song-hee about the things that had been done to her locker. She had not told him about the notes. She had not told him because telling him felt like asking for something, and she had spent her whole life being careful not to ask for too much.
I think
about you, Song-hee said. His voice was low, even, the way it always was, but underneath the evenness was something pulled tight. Every day, not just when I see you, when I wake up, when I'm supposed to be reading and I'm not reading, when Do-hek is talking to me and I have no idea what he's saying because I'm thinking about something you said 3 days ago. Kosi turned back to look at him. Song-hee. You said something once in the greenhouse. You said that you don't want people to be kind to you because they feel sorry for you. You said you'd rather be alone than be someone's charity case. He paused. I need you to know that this is not that. What I feel when I'm with you has nothing to do with feeling sorry for anyone. It's the opposite of that. You make me feel like I've been walking through my own life half asleep, and you just turned on every light. The silence between them was not empty. It was so full she could barely breathe through it. You know what people are saying, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. You know what it would mean. For you, for your family. Yes. Something moved across his face, brief and controlled. My father makes his position clear about everything. He's made his position clear about what I should study, who I should become, what I should want. He met her eyes. I've spent 19 years being very obedient. I'm starting to understand that obedience isn't the same as living. Kosi felt something crack open in her chest, slow and irreversible, the way ice breaks in spring. She had been holding herself together very carefully for months, since the first week of school when a girl in her biology class had leaned over and told her in a sweet and terrible whisper that she should prepare herself because people like her never lasted here. Since the morning she found her locker door smeared with something dark and a note taped underneath it that said, "Go back to Africa," in sharp, deliberate letters. Since the photo that Jin Ah-rin posted online, edited and distorted and captioned in Korean that Siri translated for her with a face of fury, she's only here because she wants his money.
She had held herself together through all of it. She had called her mother and said, "Everything is fine, I'm adjusting." She had sat across from Mrs. Choi during office hours and said, "I just want to focus on my studies." She had smiled at Siri and said, "I'm okay, I promise," because Siri worried so loudly and so physically with her whole body, and Kosi couldn't bear being the reason for that kind of worry. But here, in the rain, with Song-hee looking at her like she was something real and specific and irreplaceable, she felt the careful structure she had built inside herself begin to tremble. "I'm scared," she admitted. It cost her something to say it. "I know," he said. "Me too." She hadn't expected that. "You're scared?" "I'm terrified." And for the first time she could see it, clearly in his face, the boy behind the composure. "I've never wanted something this much. I've never told anyone that. My whole life, wanting things too much was dangerous because people could take them from you or use them against you, or you could lose them and that would break something in you that didn't heal right. He exhaled slowly. But I'd rather be terrified and honest than calm and empty. Kosi. He said her name the way he always did, carefully, like it mattered that he got it right. I love you. The rain fell. She looked at him for a long, suspended moment, this boy who had sat across from her when no one else would, who had learned how to pronounce her name correctly on the first try and had never once made her feel like an inconvenience, or an experiment, or a statement, who had listened to her talk about pediatric medicine with the kind of attention that made her feel like her dreams were solid and real and possible. If I say yes, she said slowly, it won't be easy. No. People will be cruel, more than they already have been. His jaw tightened. What do you mean, more than they already have been? She hesitated. She had not planned to tell him, but something about the way he was looking at her, the directness of it, made evasion feel wrong in a way it hadn't before. She told him about the locker, about the notes, about the photo. She told him calmly, without dramatics, watching his face as she spoke. She had not been prepared for what she saw there. The careful composure he wore so naturally collapsed, and what replaced it was something raw and cold and very, very still. The kind of stillness that comes before something decisive. How long? He asked. A few weeks. Why didn't you tell me? Because, she said, and she heard the honesty in her own voice before she could stop it. I didn't want to need you. He closed the remaining distance between them and took her hands, both of them, in his. His hands were warm despite the cold air and the rain smell. She felt the steadiness in them. You're allowed to need people, Kosi, especially people who want to be needed by you. Something in her finally let go. Okay, she whispered. He looked at her. Okay? Okay. She met his eyes. I'm saying yes. The smile that crossed his face was slow and real and nothing like the polished public expression the school had decided he owned. It was something private, something she suspected very few people had ever seen. We should go inside, she said, before we both get soaked. We're already soaked, he pointed out. She looked down at herself. She was right. The rain had been drifting sideways under the overhang for the past several minutes, and she had been too absorbed in the conversation to notice. She laughed, and the sound surprised her, genuine and sudden, and Song-hee laughed too, and for a moment the courtyard and the rain and Seoul and everything complicated about all of it fell away, and there was this. But Seoul did not stay away for long. By the next morning, somehow, the way things always somehow happened in that school, everyone knew. Kosi arrived to find Siri waiting outside the front gate with an expression that was equal parts fierce protectiveness and barely suppressed joy. Tell me everything, Siri said, grabbing her arm. Right now, all of it. How do you already know? Kosi asked. Do-hyuk told me. Song-hee told Do-hyuk. Do-hyuk texted me at 11 last night because apparently he also cannot keep anything to himself when he's excited. Siri was pulling her through the gate and down the main corridor, her voice low and fast. I'm going to need you to understand that I have been waiting for this since the day he sat down at our table and looked at you like you personally invented oxygen. Are you happy? Are you scared? Both is acceptable. Both is expected. Both, Kosi confirmed. Siri squeezed her arm. Good. Both means it's real. But even Siri's warmth couldn't insulate them from what was already spreading through the school like something catching fire. In the hallways, people stared differently now, not with the distant, assessing curiosity of the early weeks, but with something sharper and more personal. Groups went quiet as Kosi passed. Some faces held expressions she couldn't interpret and chose not to try. Chon Ne-eun was standing near the lockers with Kwon Sarah and Yoo Hae-jin when Kosi turned the corner. Naeun was the kind of beauty that had clearly never been questioned, all clean lines and perfect posture, and the specific confidence of someone who had always been exactly where she believed she belonged. She looked at Cozy with an expression that was almost calm, which was somehow worse than anger. "Congratulations," she said pleasantly, the way someone says something pleasant that is not pleasant at all. Cozy met her eyes. "Thank you," she said, and kept walking. She heard Naeun say something in Korean to Sarah as she passed, too low to catch, and she heard Sarah's responding laugh, light and sharp. Sari, who had heard, gripped Cozy's arm tighter and said through her teeth, "Ignore her." "I am," Cozy said. "I mean it. Whatever she's planning, she can't touch you." Cozy wanted to believe that. She was not entirely sure she did. The week that followed was strange and disorienting in the way that all major changes are, the world rearranged around a new fact and everyone adjusting to the new shape of things. Song-hee walked beside her in the halls. He saved her a seat in the classes they shared. He was, she realized, doing everything publicly and deliberately, making a statement with every small action that he was not embarrassed, not conflicted, not performing a private drama he intended to resolve in Naeun's favor. It meant more to her than she said. Do-hyuk, Song-hee's best friend, appeared at their lunch table with his tray and a wide, uncomplicated grin, and said in careful English, "Hello, Cozy. I am Do-hyuk. I am very happy to officially be your friend." She had liked him immediately. Ma Eun-byul, the quiet girl from her literature class who had never spoken to her directly, but had also never looked at her with anything unkind, stopped her in the library one afternoon and said hesitantly, "Your presentation last week about medical access in sub-Saharan Africa, it was the best one. I just wanted to say that." Cozy thanked her, and something about the interaction stayed with her for days. Not all changing minds announced themselves loudly. Some arrived quietly, in libraries, in the middle of the afternoon. But Naeun was not quiet. The photo appeared online on Thursday. Cozy found out because Sari called her at 7 in the morning, and Sari's voice had the specific texture of barely contained fury that meant something had happened that required immediate management. The photo was from the charity event 2 weeks ago, taken from an angle that made it look like Cozy was reaching into Song-hee's jacket pocket. Jin Ah-rin had posted it with a caption that translated, Sari told her tightly, to, "So this is what a scholarship really buys." Within 2 hours, it had been shared 400 times. Within 4 hours, the comments were a landscape of things Cozy forced herself not to read past the first line of each. She sat on her dormitory bed and looked at her hands for a while. Then she called her mother. Her mother said in Igbo, then English, then Igbo again, "My daughter, I did not raise you to be broken by people who do not know your name. Do you hear me? Your grandmother did not pray over you every Sunday for 18 years so that strangers on the internet could define you. You are Cozy. You know who you are. Do not let them make you forget." She sat with that for a long time after the call ended. Song-hee came to find her that afternoon, and the moment he saw her face, he sat down next to her on the bench outside the library and didn't say anything for a moment, which was exactly right. "I'm going to handle this," he said finally. "You don't have to." "Cozy." His voice was quiet and firm. "I know I don't have to. I want to." "What does handling it look like?" "Jin Ah-rin will take the post down. I'll make sure of that. And Naeun," he paused, "I'm going to talk to her." "Song-hee, I don't want to be the reason you have conflict with people you've known for years." He looked at her steadily. "You're not the reason. The reason is that people are doing something wrong. You just made it impossible for me to keep pretending it doesn't matter." He paused. "It always mattered. I just didn't know who it was happening to yet." The post came down by that evening. Cozy didn't ask how. She suspected she didn't need to. But Na-eun's response to Song-hee's conversation with her, whatever it had been, was not retreat. It was escalation. She could feel it gathering in the atmosphere of the school over the following days, the way you feel a storm before you see it, a certain pressure in the air. It broke at the worst possible time, as such things always do. 3 days before the annual school festival, Cozy was called to the academic office. She walked in to find the vice principal seated behind his desk with an expression she could not read and 2 printed sheets of paper on the desk in front of him. "We've received a report," he said carefully, "that the advanced chemistry answer accents were found in your possession." The world tilted slightly. "I'm sorry." A concerned student reported it. The exam answers that were allegedly stolen from the faculty server last week. He slid the printed sheets toward her. Screenshots of what appeared to be a messaging application. Her name, the exam file attached. Cozy stared at it. Her mind, very calmly and very clearly, presented her with the knowledge that she had never seen this conversation in her life, that the account used her name but had a slightly different handle she wouldn't have noticed at first glance, that someone had built this very carefully. "This isn't me," she said. "The student who reported it provided these screenshots with your name clearly visible. I understand what they show." She kept her voice steady. She had spent months keeping her voice steady. "But that account is not mine. My actual handle has 2 underscores, not 1, and I have never accessed any exam materials outside of normal class channels." She met his eyes. "I would like to see the full account information, and I would like to know who made the report." He hesitated. She could see in his hesitation that he had not expected this response. Perhaps he had expected tears. Perhaps he had expected confession. She gave him neither. "I'll need to verify," he said. "Please do," she said. "I'll wait." She sat in the chair against the wall and folded her hands in her lap and waited. She had texted Song-hee and Seri from the hallway before entering. She had done it with steady hands and a clear head, which surprised her, and then didn't. Her grandmother had told her once, "When the test comes, you'll find out how much of yourself you've built." The door opened 20 minutes later. Song-hee walked in, followed by Mrs. Choi, who was carrying a tablet and whose expression was the careful neutrality of someone who has already looked at something and formed a conclusion they are waiting for the right moment to present. "I apologize for entering without being invited," Song-hee said to the vice principal, in the respectful, measured tone he used with authority figures. The vice principal, to his credit, gestured for him to continue. Mrs. Choi placed the tablet on the desk. On the screen was a side-by-side comparison, the account in the screenshots and Cozy's actual verified account. She had pulled the school's registration records, which included students' social media handles as part of the digital communication policy. The difference was clear once you knew to look for it. The account used in these screenshots was created 8 days ago. Cozy's verified account has been active for 3 years. The handles are not identical. She swiped the screen. "Additionally, I requested the server access logs from our IT department this morning when Song-hee brought this to my attention. Cozy's registered devices show no access to the faculty file server at any time." Silence in the room. "Someone created a false account to impersonate me," Cozy said. Her voice was very quiet, "and submitted fabricated evidence." The vice principal was very still. "Do you know who?" Cozy said nothing. Song-hee said nothing, but something in the room shifted, a collective understanding arriving without anyone having to name it.
The fallout from that afternoon moved through the school the way the rain had moved through the courtyard, fast and total, and leaving everything rearranged. Nayeon's involvement was not publicly announced. The school handled it with the discreet efficiency of institutions that are more concerned with reputation than justice. But schools are made of people, and people tell each other things, and by the morning of the festival, everyone knew. Kosi heard Sarah crying in the bathroom. She heard Haijin tell someone in the hallway that she hadn't known it would go that far, that she had just thought it was supposed to scare Kosi, not actually get her expelled. She heard through Sari that Nayeon had been asked to meet with the principal and her parents, and would face a disciplinary committee. She did not feel triumphant. She felt tired, and something that was not quite relief, more like the feeling after a storm when the ground is wet and the air is clean, and you have to decide what to do with all the silence. The festival happened anyway. The school year moved forward because school years did. The courtyard was strung with lanterns, and the student council had organized performances and food stalls and an art exhibition, and Kosi had agreed weeks ago to help coordinate the medical awareness booth she and 2 other students had proposed, and she was not going to let what happened make her smaller than she was. She was arranging pamphlets at the booth when Songhee appeared through the crowd. He was in his school uniform, but without the blazer, and he had the slightly deliberate look of someone who has decided to do something and is not going to deliberate about it any further.
"Come with me," he said. "I'm running the booth. Eunbyul is here. She'll cover for 10 minutes. He nodded to where Ma Eunbyul was already moving behind the table with the quiet efficiency she brought to everything. Kosi raised an eyebrow. "You planned this." 10 minutes, he said. She followed him through the crowd, through the lantern light and the smell of tteokbokki and the sounds of a school being for one afternoon collectively young and uncomplicated. He led her to the small raised platform near the main stage where the student council made announcements, and then he did something that made her stomach drop with a specific and unfamiliar mixture of alarm and awe. He picked up the microphone. The crowd quieted in the way that crowds quiet when Kang Sang-hee does something unexpected, which is to say, immediately and completely. "I want to say something," he said. His voice through the speakers was calm and clear. "Most of you know who Kosi Okafor is. Some of you knew about her before she arrived because a scholarship from Nigeria to one of Korea's most competitive schools is not a small thing. Some of you decided before you ever spoke to her what kind of person she was." The crowd was very still. Kosi stood at the edge of the platform and looked at him and felt something large and inarticulate moving through her chest. "Kosi is the most genuinely good person I have ever met," Songhee said. "Not because she's perfect, because she chooses to be decent every single day, even when this school has given her every reason not to be. She helped a cleaner carry boxes when she thought no one was watching. She stayed up until 2 in the morning helping a student she barely knew prepare for an oral exam. She found out someone who treated her badly was in the hospital with a blood type that's rare, and she went to the hospital and donated blood without telling anyone." He paused. "I found that out by accident. That's the kind of person she is, the kind that does the right thing when no one is watching." Kosi had not known he knew about the blood donation. She had not told anyone. She had just gone, quietly, because it was the right thing to do, because she was going to be a doctor, and doctors did not choose who deserved their help based on whether that person had been kind to them. "I love her," Songhee said, simply, into the microphone, into the lantern light, into the quiet crowd. He set the microphone down. The silence lasted long enough that Kosi thought she could feel it as a physical thing. And then, from somewhere near the food stalls, someone started clapping. Then someone else, then the sound built in the way sounds build when they've been waiting for permission. Songhee stepped off the platform and stood beside her. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know. You're going to be insufferable about this." The corner of his mouth lifted. "Probably. She looked at the crowd, at the faces turning toward them, some uncertain, some moved, some still processing, and she thought about her grandmother's words, "Be a light wherever you go, even when they try to put you out." She had not put herself out. She had stayed lit through all of it, not because it didn't hurt, because it did, enormously, in ways she would not be able to fully understand until years later when she had distance and language for it, but because she had decided somewhere in the first terrible week that she was not going to become the version of herself that Soul's worst behavior wanted to create. Small, bitter, closed. She refused. Quietly and daily, she refused. Unbyul appeared at her elbow. "The booth is fine. Take your time." Then, almost shyly, "I'm sorry for the things I didn't say sooner when I should have said them." "You said them when you were ready. That's enough," Kosi said. Unbyul nodded and slipped back into the crowd. Sari appeared from the other direction, already crying, which for Sari meant very little because she cried at everything that mattered to her. "I can't believe him," she said, gesturing generally at Kang Sang-hee. "I can't believe either of you. You're going to make me write a speech at your wedding." "We've been together for 3 weeks," Kosi said. "And?" Sang-hee looked at Kosi. Kosi looked at Sang-hee. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said, and everything left to do, and somehow that was enough. Chairman Kang Jun-tae came to the school 2 weeks later. Kosi did not know he was coming until Sang-hee texted her, "My father wants to meet you. Don't worry." She worried anyway, and then decided that worrying was a reasonable response to meeting a billionaire who had expressly instructed his son to end her relationship, and that she was allowed to be a reasonable person with reasonable feelings, and then she straightened her back and went. He was taller than she expected. He had Sang-hee's eyes, the same careful, measuring quality, but 30 years more weight in them. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at investment proposals, thorough and unimpressed, and searching for the thing that would change his assessment. She looked back at him. "My son tells me," he said in precise English, "that you intend to be a pediatric doctor." "Yes, sir." "International practice?" "Eventually. I want to work with children in underserved regions, in Nigeria to begin with, and across the continent." He was quiet for a moment. "That is not a profitable specialty." "No," she agreed, "it's not." Something shifted in his expression, very small. "Sang-hee's mother," he said, and then stopped. He tried again. "When my son was 6 years old, he had a respiratory crisis. We were not in Seoul. We were in a rural area 2 hours from the nearest hospital. A doctor, a young woman, a local doctor with a small clinic and almost nothing to work with, kept him stable for 4 hours until the ambulance arrived." He paused. "I have thought about that doctor every year since. I never learned her name." He looked at Kosi with those heavy, measuring eyes. "My son tells me you saved his life once. He told me the story. You were 8 years old, visiting family in the area, and you performed basic first aid to a boy who had been stung by bees and gone into shock, and kept him calm until adults arrived. He was wearing a festival tag, a name tag. He recognized your name when you introduced yourself in class." Kosi felt the room become very still. She remembered it. She had not connected it. A small boy at a festival, crying and swelling and terrified, and her grandmother saying firmly, "Do not panic, Kosi. Panic is useless," and walking her through what to do. She had never known the boy's name. She had thought about him occasionally, wondered if he was all right. She looked at Sang-hee, who was watching her with an expression she had no words for. "I didn't know," she said. "I know," Sang-hee said quietly. "I figured it out at the charity event, when you mentioned your grandmother's village. I was going to tell you when the timing was right." The chairman made a sound, low and inarticulate, and looked away toward the window. When he looked back, his expression had not softened exactly. It wasn't that kind of face, but it had changed in some essential way, like a room where a window has been opened. "I owe you a debt that cannot be calculated," he said to Kosi. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I would have done it for anyone." "Yes," he said. "I believe that." A pause. "That is precisely the point." The graduation ceremony was on a clear June morning. The sky over Seoul washed the particular clean blue that only appears after rain. Kosi sat in the third row with Sari on one side and Eun Buell on the other, her graduation gown warm in the sun, her name in the program under academic distinctions, top of her cohort in sciences. She thought about the morning she had arrived at Incheon Airport so many months ago, with 2 suitcases and a scholarship letter and her grandmother's voice in her ear, "Be a light." She thought about the first terrible weeks and the whispers and the locker and the notes. She thought about a rain-soaked corridor and a boy who checked the weather every morning because he liked to know what was coming. When they called her name, she walked across that stage and accepted her certificate and turned to look out at the audience, and she found, without looking for them, her mother's face in the 4th row, who had flown in from Lagos 3 days ago and had cried every morning since, and beside her, Song-hee, who was not graduating today but had come anyway, who was standing and clapping with the specific intensity of someone who knows what something cost. She held up the certificate. Years later, when people asked about the scholarship program, the Okafor Kang Foundation for Cross-Cultural Education, which had placed 47 students from across Africa in Korean universities by its 4th year, Kosi would say that it had not been her idea originally. Song-hee had proposed it on a Tuesday evening in October, 2 years after graduation, when they were sitting on the floor of her apartment in the medical residency housing with his sketches and her textbooks, and he had said quietly, "What if we made it easier for the next one?" She had looked at him for a long time. He was different at 22 than he had been at 19 in the ways that matter, and the same in all the ways that are essential. Still careful, still deliberate, still looking at her with the attention of someone for whom she was specific and irreplaceable and entirely real. "The next Kosi?" she asked. "The next anyone," he said, "who deserves a door and finds a wall." She had thought about the first week, the whispers, the notes, the locker. She had thought about Eun Buell in the library who had quietly changed, and the bully who needed blood, and the choice she had made without hesitation, and the rain in the courtyard, and her grandmother's voice, "Be a light." "Yes," she said, "let's do that." Their love story was not the kind that made the news for its romance, though it was romantic, deeply and specifically in the way that real things are. It made the news, eventually, for the foundation, for the 47 students, for the speech Song-hee gave at a cultural exchange summit, in which he said clearly and publicly, "Prejudice is not tradition, it is a choice. And so is change." But before all of that, before the foundation and the summit and the 47 students, there was a corridor in the rain. A girl from Lagos who had decided not to be broken, a boy who had looked at her, not past her, and seen something true. That was where it started. Everything else was what they built with it. If this story moved something in you, it was meant to. Stories about love that crosses borders, challenges prejudice, and refuses to stay quiet are the stories that change how we see each other. If you felt that, leave a comment and tell me which moment hit you hardest. And if you think someone else needs to hear this story today, share it with them. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because the next story is already waiting.